Hello, this is my presentation of the evolution of England's three main economic sectors in the last 50 years. So, since the dawn of humanity, the trading system has been used to evolve societies and carry out exchanges, both material, cultural, political, and social. This allowed the expansion of the human knowledge as well as develop unique ability to understand consumer needs. So, the retail sector is one of the most, but if not the most, important in an economy because it's directly linked to the customer and the consumer. From convenience stores to kiosks to supermarkets and more recently to shopping malls, the evolution of retail sales are one of the main parts of England's pop culture. So the evolution of retail sales has become one of the main pillars of society, and the constant need for the innovation made part of this world has helped the retail sector to remain very important. So in England, in terms of regulation of this retail sector, the idea was always a laissez-faire approach, which means that let it run its own faith. But in the beginning of 1970s, in order to have a controlled evolution, the retail markets underwent some regulations in order to help its older forms of commerce, such as small family commerce and convenience stores, because of the creation of shopping malls, large supermarkets that contain a greater variety of products and services. So local and smaller businesses were heavily affected by this because the consumers shifted their focus from these local stores to these higher surfaces. So the evolution of retail sales took a major hit when this happened. Um, Until 1970, there were 13 major supermarket chains. You can see the variety here. And the main ones were Asda, Booth, Budgens, Co-op Foods, Farm Foods, Fulton Foods, Aaron Foods, Iceland, Marks and Spencer, Morrison's, Sainsbury's, Tesco, and Waitrose. But the five more important ones were Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, Iceland, Marks and Spencer, and Booth. All these became one of the most important parts in the day-to-day life of an English citizen. So what did these stores do in order to keep their high level of customers? So firstly, their logos were changed. So as we can see here, these are the most recent logos of Tesco, for example, but they suffered through several stages in order to caught the customer's eyes, and not only is that, but the interiors of the store was changed. So the products that these stores wanted to sell were placed at the consumer's eyes in order for them to sell more and to be more reachable. So this was easier for Tesco to understand because they had one of the major innovations. They were um, the most important supply of food for England, and it's still now one of the main exporters and importers of food to other countries. So at the same time, the interiors of the store was changed, the innovation was coming, but there was something missing. So reaching the 1990s, the regulation of retail markets returned to the 1980s point because the competition between these large supermarkets was becoming unhealthy, and the environmental impacts of these supermarkets, because they were producing so much, took a big toll on the country's most peripheral cities. So the regulation began again um, from a laissez-faire precedent, but this regulation came again because of a recession that would be saved precisely by this retail sector. So because of a historic achievement, thanks to the consumers and this sector in particular, the story of Britain's recovery from recession became a success, and the following years resulted in the consolidation of the sector as the main player in England's economic development. So after this, in the more recent years, like from 2000 and to 2020, for the recent years, online shopping became one of the main actors in the new trend of shopping for everything that you need. So whether you need a clothing, whether you need a cucumber, you can go online shopping and get everything from you at home. So this helps to reduce the impact of any of going to the store, wasting fuel, and this brings environmentally friendly options. So in the end, on the end of this recession in 2008, these supply stores were heavily affected because there were no, their consumers didn't have any money to spend on their more important goods and services. So they took a big toll on their on their on their on their profits. And so in the later years, from 2008 2012 was when the subprime crisis happened. These stores were very bad in terms of profits, and they had to reinvent themselves. Not long after this, the COVID-19 crisis underwent the entire world and heavily affected again this British retail sector. So although this British retail sector doesn't have a very specified objective and management, it's still the most important sector of the country, and it helps the majority, or not all, or all the population of England and the Great Britain, because it represents the pop culture of spending, and the main important part of the market. So market equals spending. So moving on to the British manufacturing sector, this UK manufacturing sector is perhaps one of the oldest sectors in the country, dating back to early to 16th century with the creation of factories. So this century also marks the beginning of the labor movement in the country that forever marks the political, social, cultural, and economic dynamics of the workers' rights. So addressing the evolution of the manufacturing sector over the last 50 years, starting in 1970 and ending in 2020, this sector went through three important phases. So 1950 to 1973, 1973 to 2007, and 2007 to present. So 1973 period was called the transition age, or the golden age, marked by economic growth, low unemployment, and stable and low inflation. So this transition period is called by the aspect of the 60s of the deindustrialization that would seek to make a trade-off that would result in the reduction of largest number of workers in order to save costs that would ultimately increase profits while maintaining high productions. So unfortunately, this process of deindustrialization didn't work well. As you can see, the state intervention that didn't happen because of laissez-faire only came to terms after 1980. So this state intervention that came to terms didn't go very well. This intervention only helped bigger companies, which made the competition inside the country to drop. So this would mean that the smaller companies that would eventually need the help from the government weren't getting their help. So poorer companies were bankrupt, and bigger companies were getting even richer. This demonstrates the asymmetry of the helping of the government from 1980 governments. So all these problems in the manufacturing sector resulting in the removal of the Conservative Party from the government of England, solely because this government didn't have a long-term plan for the companies and the companies that didn't belong to the state. So they didn't have a formed plan in order to prevent these companies from bankrupting. And of course, this led to a stagflation. So what is a stagflation? Stagflation is a stagnant high inflation with very high unemployment. So of course, all of these factors led to the removal of the Conservative Party from the government of England, spending almost 20 years, but obviously it wasn't the best term of office, because it left England in a very dark spot, because they needed this British manufacturing sector to work, because it's the second largest, and in the end it didn't result very well. So moving on, we went from no intervention to a Labour government, and this Labour government had a very focused objective, which was to increase national competitiveness. So with this, they increased workers' wages, they increased the subsidies to companies that were poorer, and this led to a very high level of production. And in the end, the economic growth of the country eventually rose. So after this, we enter in the 2000 era, and there were a few years that were very good, but we went to 2007, 2008, 2009. Of course, what we know about it is the subprime crisis. So this this industry became very volatile because all of the workers went home um, to understand what was happening, and what was happening was companies went bankrupt because of their investments, and they couldn't pay their workers because they had no money, since the banks were not loaning money. So this led to a very high level of unemployment. So moving on from the subprime crisis, the British manufacturing sector went through a good phase of 6-7 years, but now with the COVID-19 crisis and the Brexit, it's still also as well in a very dark spot. So the COVID-19 crisis sent everyone home. They weren't able to work for a few months, went on a leave absence, and this left some of their workers in unemployed. And of course, after Brexit, some companies that could not outsource to England were left to go any place else to get their business flowing. So a high level of unemployment was the result of the subprime crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, and the Brexit crisis as well. So although everything that has happened, the British manufacturing sector is still the second main sector in England. It's recovering from the COVID-19 crisis, and it's expected to come back. And in the end, it will recover because of the new government. So moving on to the last part of this presentation, the British financial sector. It is the most ancient sector in Britain because of the creation of the Bank of England. So this financial sector began in the early 70s because there not in the early 70s, of course it began in the 17th century, but we'll approach the 1970s part here because the creation of the Bank of England only was put together, and the image of the banking community was only approached in the late 1970s, and the UK government had a lot of various reforms to safeguard the system, because although this banking system approaches every factor, every variable, it still has a lot of flaws. It has several problems and a lot of uncertainties caused by changes in the regulatory regimes, a lot of producing problems, a lot of human resources problems, and it is crucial that this sector approaches in a more cautious way, because in the 1974 another crisis came and the financial sector was heavily affected, and of course there was a need to intensify the competition inside the country. So what did the conservative government do? They bring foreign banks, and not only foreign banks, non-banking financial institutions, to increase competitiveness. So what did this do? This increasing national competitiveness helped to come together the British banks in order to safeguard the national population, because many banks went bankrupt because of no safeguards, and basically there was a very important part of this safeguard that was not thought through, and in the end the population, some parts of the population that had life savings and everything in their bank, were heavily affected, and they went bankrupt as well. So it's good to have a safeguard of the bank, and in the late 1990s a new system of safeguarding the banks and the identity, as well as the money of the client was introduced, and now it's a permanent link to everything that has happened from the beginning to now. So three main points here in this presentation was the subprime crisis. Of course, I've explained before, subprime crisis was the main downfall of the British financial sector, and not only British, but in the world. This heavily impacted as well the banks. A lot of banks went bankrupt. A lot of people went bankrupt, and the influence from the United States to the markets, the financial markets, allowed the British financial sector to think about a new approach to the market, and it had no time. With the Brexit and the COVID-19 and the impact on the pound in the economy, the British financial sector took a big toll, and it's now recovering from the damages that it took. So what can we learn about this presentation is that although these markets and these sectors are very important to the country, they can also be very volatile and very sensitive to everything that happens in the country. So understanding the evolution of these three sectors gives us a brief explanation of what a country has to go through, a population has to go through, and in the end, it's important to understand what happens when bad decisions are taken. So thank you very much for listening to me. This is my presentation. Goodbye.